1,800-year-old Roman military camp linked to Marcus Aurelius discovered in Slovakia, revealing soldiers buried in pits with their armor. Archaeologists in Slovakia have uncovered the remains of a remarkably well-preserved Roman military camp dating back nearly 1,850 years, offering fresh insights into one of the Roman Empire's most turbulent military campaigns. Now let's explore the complete story from every perspective on our AI podcast.
Imagine you're standing on the edge of a pristine 1,800-year-old military base.
Right.
And it belongs to the absolute greatest superpower of its time. You look out, and, well, everything is perfectly laid out.
The engineering is just immaculate.
Exactly. The defensive earthworks are mathematically precise. The 5 entrance gates are exactly where they should be. It is a monument to order, built by an army that practically worshipped routine. But then you walk over to the defensive trenches.
And the water wells.
Yeah, you look down into the deep water wells, and suddenly things get very, very dark.
It's a profound shift from this perfect military discipline to, honestly, absolute chaos. What you find in those ditches completely upends our understanding of how this particular war machine operated.
So we are looking at a historical mystery today. For this deep dive, we are pulling from a stack of brand new archaeological reports from MH Invest and the Institute of Archaeology at the Slovak Academy of Sciences.
Along with some really recent field updates.
Right, from an excavation in Sereni, which is down in southwestern Slovakia. Researchers have unearthed this massive Roman military camp. But the deeper they dig, the less it looks like a standard military outpost.
It starts looking like a crime scene.
Exactly. A crime scene or some sort of catastrophe that defies everything we know about the highly disciplined Roman army. So, okay, let's unpack this.
The stakes of this mystery are incredibly high, historically speaking. I mean, we aren't looking at a random outpost on the fringes of nowhere. This camp is directly tied to one of Rome's most famous emperors.
Right.
And it's connected to a brutal frontier conflict that fundamentally tested the limits of the entire empire. We're looking at a moment where the unstoppable force of Rome met a highly motivated, immovable object.
To really understand how bizarre the findings at this site are, you first have to appreciate what this place was supposed to be. This camp in Sereni is massive. It covers about 7.4 hectares.
Which is just over 18 acres.
Yeah, so for you listening, imagine about 14 American football fields pushed together and then fortified with these curved ditch and rampart walls.
It's actually one of the largest and best preserved Roman military sites ever discovered in Slovakia.
And what the Slovak Academy of Sciences uncovered is basically a textbook example of Roman military engineering.
No, absolutely. When the Roman legions were on the march, they didn't just sleep in open fields. At the end of every single day, they essentially built a fortified town from scratch.
A brand new town every day.
Every single day. We are talking about deep defensive trenches, towering earthworks, and a highly deliberate internal layout. Every tent had a specific mathematically assigned coordinate.
So the legionaries were as much a construction crew as they were a fighting force.
Exactly. They were engineers with swords.
It is essentially a massive, perfectly organized pop-up city designed entirely for war. And they built this during the Marcomannic Wars, which was this series of incredibly fierce conflicts between AD 166 and AD 180.
Right. Where the Romans were fighting an alliance of Germanic tribes, specifically the Marcomanni. They lived in what is now modern-day Slovakia and the Czech Republic, just north of the Danube River.
And the Danube was a huge deal back then.
Oh, it was a critical frontier for Rome. It was the natural border separating the empire from what they considered barbarian territory. And this wasn't some minor border skirmish delegated to a mid-level general, you know?
Right. Emperor Marcus Aurelius was personally commanding these armies.
Yes. He spent years out there in the freezing mud, campaigning along this dangerous frontier while simultaneously trying to manage the administration of the entire Roman Empire.
Just as a quick aside on the environment out there, the Sereni camp is only the second Roman military site ever discovered in Western Slovakia.
Yeah, it's very rare.
And the first one, which was just identified by Slovak archaeologists in 2024, is actually believed to be the spot where Marcus Aurelius wrote parts of his famous book, Meditations.
It's an amazing detail.
Right. You have the ultimate philosopher king writing stoic reflections on life and mortality while surrounded by this brutal grinding war.
The mind behind Meditations overseeing this massive, violent frontier apparatus is such a fascinating juxtaposition. It paints a picture of the psychological toll that frontier took on everyone. I mean, from the emperor down to the lowest foot soldier.
Hold on, though. I have to stop you there. because the math on the survival rate of this site doesn't add up for me.
Okay, how so?
Well, if this was a massive active war zone, and these were temporary marching camps built mostly out of, piled dirt and timber, why is it so perfectly preserved today?
Ah, that is the big question.
It's been almost 2 millennia. Shouldn't a pop-up dirt fort have been completely erased by centuries of farming or modern construction, or just natural wind and rain over 1,800 years?
Matej Repke, the director of the Sereni Institute of Archaeology, actually addressed this exact anomaly. He stated that we have a unique opportunity to explore practically an entire Roman marching camp, which is extremely rare in the European context.
Because they usually get destroyed.
Right. And the reason this one survived is our first major clue. The evidence suggests this camp wasn't gradually decommissioned.
It didn't pack it up.
Exactly. The Romans didn't dismantle it, and local populations never repurposed the land. It disappeared from use almost immediately after a military conflict and was left completely untouched.
So it was abandoned overnight.
Yes, making it an accidental time capsule.
It's perfectly preserved because whoever was left just walked away and never came back, which is incredibly eerie when you look at what the archaeologists actually found inside the perimeter.
Eerie is a good word for it.
Because when they started digging into those neat, orderly, defensive ditches, they didn't find a clean Roman footprint. They found bodies.
And not in a formal cemetery either.
No. They found human remains, like skeletons and skeletal fragments, just shoved into shallow burial pits, thrown into the defensive ditches, and most shockingly, dumped straight down the camp's water wells.
It's just wild.
Marek Wojciech, one of the archaeologists on site, noted that early analysis strongly suggests these are Roman soldiers.
The deviance from standard Roman protocol here cannot be overstated. I mean, the Roman military was an institution built entirely on ritual, honor, and strict procedures for everything, especially death.
They had rules for everything.
They really did. A fallen Roman soldier was owed proper rites. Standard practice was cremation or formal burial in an acropolis situated well outside the camp walls.
Usually with gravestones, right?
Yes, often with gravestones or markers paid for by burial clubs that the soldiers funded themselves.
So throwing your own soldiers into a defensive ditch or a water well doesn't sound like a military funeral. It sounds like a frantic cover-up or a desperate last stand.
It completely ignores all their traditions.
And think about the basic logistics for a second. If you put dead, decomposing bodies into your own water well, you have just intentionally poisoned your primary water supply.
You absolutely do not do that unless you are out of options.
Right. Deliberately contaminating the water supply implies they had zero intention of ever returning to that camp, or ever needing a single drop of water from that well again.
It points to a rapid catastrophic event. This wasn't a standard post-battle cleanup where the victors meticulously clear the field.
This was panic.
Exactly. We could be looking at the aftermath of a massacre where a sudden, overwhelming siege by the Marcomanni breached the walls. Or perhaps it was a devastating outbreak of disease.
Like a plague.
Yeah, and the survivors were desperately trying to dispose of highly contagious bodies before fleeing for their lives.
Okay, but if they were fleeing a disease, you'd think they'd grab their gear and run. But they didn't even do that. They left a fortune behind.
An absolute fortune.
The archaeologists didn't just find bodies in those ditches. They found an unbelievable amount of military hardware right there in the dirt with the skeletons.
It is an incredibly rich deposit of artifacts. Researchers uncovered Roman spears, arrowheads, fragments of iron helmets, and pieces of both segmented armor and scale armor. They even found legionary brooches, which pinned their cloaks together, and Roman coins scattered with the remains.
For anyone listening who is trying to visualize this, the segmented armor is that classic overlapping iron band armor you see in every gladiator movie.
The lorica segmentata.
Right. And scale armor is exactly what it sounds like. It's hundreds of small, individual metal scales meticulously wired together to act like flexible iron skin. Neither of these things were cheap.
Not at all. The manufacturing process for scale armor alone required a blacksmith to spend weeks cutting, punching, and wiring together individual plates. It was incredibly labor-intensive.
So Roman armor was essentially expensive state property.
Yes, and the Roman military functioned like a massive recycling machine. After a battle, they historically scoured the field to recover every single usable weapon and piece of armor.
They didn't waste anything.
They even had specialized units whose entire job was to salvage iron. You did not simply abandon perfectly good segmented armor in a ditch.
So if the Romans won whatever fight happened here, they would have meticulously collected all this expensive gear. It was too valuable to leave.
Right.
But if the Germanic tribes won, if the Marcomanni completely overran the camp and slaughtered the garrison, they absolutely would have looted the dead.
Oh, without question. To a Germanic warrior, a set of Roman iron armor was like capturing a tank. It was an incredible prize.
So the fact that all this high-end military loot is still sitting there in the dirt means nobody from either side stuck around to collect it.
Which is baffling.
It is literally like finding an abandoned bank vault. The door is wide open, the security guards are missing, and stacks of cash are just sitting on the table. Why would both sides flee and leave the money?
It's a great analogy, and it forces us to look at the very few theories that actually fit this physical evidence. Why would a victorious force walk away from a fortune?
Right.
One of the strongest possibilities is that the camp was hit by a plague, something so highly contagious and so visually terrifying that it panicked both the Romans and the Marcomanni into abandoning the site entirely.
Just absolutely refusing to touch the dead or their belongings.
Exactly.
Like the armor itself was cursed. You know, if you touch the dead guy's helmet, you catch the invisible demon that killed him.
And the Antonine Plague was ravaging the Roman Empire around this exact time period.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Historians strongly suspect it was an early strain of smallpox brought back by Roman troops returning from campaigns in the East.
That would do it.
Smallpox doesn't just kill you, it covers the body in horrific, painful pustules. It is highly visible and deeply terrifying, especially to the ancient mind.
Right. They didn't know germ theory.
Exactly. So if a severe outbreak swept through this camp, throwing the highly infectious bodies down the wells to isolate them makes sense.
And fleeing without touching their contaminated armor makes perfect logical sense, too. It completely flips the narrative of the invincible Roman war machine. I mean, a virus doesn't care about your mathematical defensive trenches.
No, it really doesn't. Though I should say, the other prevailing theory is a sudden, absolute military disaster followed by an immediate chaotic retreat.
Where they were just overrun.
Right. A situation where the Roman survivors were running for their lives into the freezing forests, pursued by the Marcomanni, and simply didn't have the time or the manpower to drag heavy 30-pound suits of scale armor out of the ditches.
The sheer panic just radiates from the archaeological record. You can almost feel the chaos of whatever day that was. But amidst all this grand, macabre mystery, the bodies in the wells, the abandoned armor, all of it, there is one discovery at this site that brings the story down to a deeply intimate human level.
Oh, the footwear.
Yes. The archaeologists found caligy.
The famous Roman military sandals, the heavy leather boots worn by the legionaries on their endless marches across the empire.
Right. Obviously, after 1,800 years in wet soil, the leather itself had completely decomposed. But the iron hobnails survived.
Which are essentially ancient metal cleats.
Yeah, the Romans hammered these heavy iron tacks into the thick leather soles of their sandals to give the soldiers traction in the mud and, to make the footwear last longer on rough terrain.
Very practical.
So the leather rotted away, but these little iron cleats survived, perfectly sealed inside compact, hardened blocks of clay.
And here is where modern scientific methodology completely changes how we interact with ancient history.
Because they didn't just dig them out?
No. In the old days of archaeology, someone would have just broken open that clay block with a trowel to get the artifacts inside. But if you do that, you destroy the context. You just end up with a handful of loose, rusty nails in a bucket.
Right. So how do you study what's inside a solid block of mud without breaking it?
The scientists used advanced X-ray and CT imaging technology.
It is so cool.
They essentially ran these blocks of earth through medical-grade scanners. The X-rays pass through the less dense packed clay but are blocked by the denser oxidized iron of the hobnails.
So they can see the layout.
Exactly. The computer software maps the density differences, allowing the researchers to see the exact original pattern of the nails suspended in three-dimensional space, entirely without destroying the mud block.
They mapped the ghost of a shoe.
They really did. Archaeologist Mikhail Chabin from the SS spoke about this process, and his absolute awe is palpable. He stated that it is literally a miracle to see the original footwear of a Roman soldier, and even to be able to determine its size.
This just blows my mind. We spent all this time talking about macro history, giant armies, Emperor Marcus Aurelius writing philosophy,
Yes.
Massive geopolitical shifts on the Danube frontier.
No big picture stuff.
Yeah. But thanks to a high-tech X-ray of a clump of mud, We literally know the shoe size of a specific young guy who stood on that exact spot 1,850 years ago.
It's incredible.
It takes this massive abstract war and grounds it in the physical reality of one person's footprint.
And that's the thing. Macro history is built entirely out of micro details. Archaeology relies on these tiny, intimate artifacts to reconstruct the broader narrative. Those suspended iron hobnails are a tangible link to an actual human being.
A real person.
A young man who was deployed to defend a dangerous, freezing frontier under Marcus Aurelius.
And doing it right before everything changed. Because Marcus Aurelius died in AD 180, and his son Commodus took over.
Right, and Commodus had a very different strategy.
He almost immediately negotiated peace with the Marcomanni to end the war, essentially abandoning his father's decades-long expansion project.
It adds an incredibly bitter layer of tragedy to this site. These soldiers, whoever they were, dying in this chaotic, undocumented event, they were fighting at the very tail end of a prolonged conflict.
Right at the finish line.
Exactly. They were the ones holding the line and suffering the worst of it, right before the political winds in Rome shifted and peace was abruptly declared.
It's so tragic. So we have this massive, pristine pop-up city. We have chaotic, desperate burials in the water supply, a fortune in abandoned, highly valuable weapons, and the X-rayed footprints of the men who left it all behind.
It's a lot to process.
It is. How do researchers actually go about solving a cold case that is nearly 2,000 years old?
Well, the preserved sandals have already been transferred to a specialized laboratory at the HSAS for detailed examination. But the scientific roadmap ahead is much broader than just the artifacts.
What's next?
Researchers are planning to conduct advanced DNA analysis on the skeletal remains retrieved from those ditches and wells.
Oh, to see if they can isolate the pathogen. Test that smallpox theory.
Yes, they will certainly look for ancient pathogen DNA. They will also sequence the human DNA to determine where these soldiers actually came from.
Because the Roman army was huge.
Right, they recruited from all over the empire. So were these men locals from the surrounding provinces, or were they conscripts brought in from North Africa or Syria to die in the Slovakian snow?
That will be fascinating to find out.
And alongside the genetics, anthropologists will run detailed physical studies on the bones themselves, looking for perimortem trauma.
Sword cuts, arrow nicks, crushing injuries, that kind of thing.
Exactly the kind of forensic evidence that would confirm a violent battle or a massacre over a purely biological event like a plague. This is full-scale ancient forensics.
So what does this all mean for you listening? It is so easy to look at history as just a list of dry dates and names in a textbook. You know, the Roman Empire expands to this river in this year. They sign a treaty in that year.
It all feels very neat and tidy.
Very clean, very organized, and entirely inevitable.
Yeah.
But a deep dive into a site like Sereni shows that history is actually incredibly messy.
It's a chaotic.
It is full of sudden, terrifying crises. Behind the grand marble statues and the stoic philosophy of the emperors, there were human beings making desperate, panicked decisions in real time just to try and survive their day.
It completely strips away the myth of Roman invincibility. And, it leaves us with a rather profound question to consider regarding how history is actually written.
Oh, what do you mean?
We know this specific camp at Sereni was left completely untouched after its abandonment. The bodies were left to rot in the wells. The expensive gear was left to rust in the mud. No Roman unit ever came back to reclaim the dead or salvage the state's property.
Which we established was totally bizarre for them.
Right. And the Roman Empire was obsessed with its own public relations. They relied on projecting an image of total, unshakable order and absolute military invincibility to keep their conquered territories in line.
And couldn't show weakness.
Exactly. Is it possible that whatever catastrophic, humiliating, or terrifying event happened at Sereni was so damaging to that carefully cultivated image that the empire deliberately chose to erase it?
Oh, wow.
Did the Roman state choose to let this camp and the men inside it simply fade into the mud, rather than put on the official historical record what really took place there?
A deliberate historical cover-up to protect the empire's brand. That is a fascinating thought to chew on as we wait for the DNA results to come back from the lab. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive, and we will catch you on the next one.
Okay, one question for you. Do you think the unusual burial of Roman soldiers in wells, ditches, and shallow pits suggests they died in a sudden battle, a deadly disease outbreak, or another mysterious event that historians have yet to uncover? Why? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.